So this is an oral history interview for the Lafayette Historical Society Oral History Project. Today's date is August 17th, 2015. The time is 11 a.m. and we are in the Lafayette Historical Society room inside the Lafayette Library. If you could just state your name and spell it.
My name is Susan Mott, M-O-T-T. My original name was Susan Wallace, W-A-L-L-A-C-E, and I was born in Lafayette, and I've lived within 5 miles of Lafayette all of my life, and I just turned 70.
Could you just give me the year that you were
born? 1945. My family came to Lafayette in 1935. And the reason they came here is my grandmother needed to supplement their income. They had moved from San Francisco in 1909, approximately in 1920s. They moved to Berkeley, and she needed to supplement their income. And how she did that was she went door to door selling. They're like encyclopedias, and they come in a big old set. And this was what every family had to have for their children to read. She was so successful, and these would be all of your nursery rhymes and things that you'd find at Fairyland and in Oakland type thing. She was so successful in her sales that she grew to the head top person and was so successful that she decided, well, I think I'll go into real estate. So she got her real estate license, and she was the first woman realtor in Berkeley in the 20s. And she decided she wanted her grandchildren to grow up in the country. So she came out to Lafayette and she saw some land. The land would be right next to El Charro, all the way to, on Mount Island Boulevard, to the gas station. And it would incorporate all the land down below. And she subdivided, well, first of all, my mom and dad, it was all walnut orchards. It was all farms, walnut orchards. There was Friendship Farms. And her property, she called Lafayette Garden Estates. So, she named it Lafayette Garden Estates. Let's see, this was my grandmother back then, Ina M. Schmidt, and this is what it looked like. It was a 2-lane road through Lafayette, and this is what all the land looked like back then. This was the little house. It was a Cape Cod cottage, and that's where I was born. And as you can see, here's the Lafayette Garden Estates sign. And all this land she subdivided and put in the sewers and put in the roads and all the utilities. And then when my mom and dad and me and my sister lived in the little house, part of the rent money that they paid to her mother, my grandmother, was to knock all the walnuts off the walnut trees, and to, it was quite a process all my life, a lot of my life doing this and selling them to the Walnut Creek nut factory.
How did you do it? Did you just hit the branches and pick them up?
They had long poles. They were bamboo poles, extremely long and very, very heavy. And you had to wait until the walnut husks were almost opening, and then you knocked them. I mean, it was months of work, and then you'd hull them with your hands. You'd take the husks off, and your hands would turn black because that's what happens. So you would have black hands in the summer. And then they would have big sawhorses all around the property, and then they would have these big boards with ridges, and then they would dry them out there on all these. Of course, rats were a little bit of a problem. They dried them for a period of time. I'm going to say maybe a month or 6 weeks or so, and then they had these jute bags that they put all the walnuts in, and then they sewed them up and took them to the Walnut Creek nut factory. And it was probably a 2.5, 3 month process for this. And so it was also, once they did subdivide the lots, it was Mom and Dad's job to sell the lots. And I think at one point I found some papers that showed, I think my grandmother was going to build houses and sell the houses on the lots, but because of all the work of doing this, I think she gave up on that one. But my parents eventually, when I was 5, they had the big house built. We called it the big house. It was very small. This is an example of, first of all, let's see. This was my grandmother. That's Ina. Very proud. She was president of Seroptimist. She went to England and carried her hat in a hat box to meet the Queen. She was formidable. Let's say that. This is a picture of this is me when I lived in the little house. And this is me and my 2 friends who are my best friends today. And as a reference point, this is El Charro Restaurant. So El Charro Restaurant was huge in my memories because the Garcia family, they were wonderful people. And they all I'd have to do is go to the back porch and say, Charlie, Charlie. You know, I would go get, they had these wax flowing candles in beautiful bright colors, and he would save the wax for me, and then he would give me the box with the wax candles that were used up, and then we would take them home and let the wax melt in the sun and use it like clay and make things. Life back then was incredible. We played in the creeks, rope swings, climbed the hills. The hills were full of wildflowers. We would dig above Carroll Lane. We'd go up in the hills up there and we would dig caves. And how we didn't get killed, I have no idea. But once our chores were done on the weekend, our time was whatever. You know, we, as kids, we could walk to town, go to the pharmacy and have 5 cents for a cherry Coke or a lemon Coke, or if we wanted to see a movie, it was a dime, you know, and you'd wait here at the Park Theater, wait around the corner. It was just incredible. Let's see, where should I go next? Okay, getting back to El Charro. El Charro just had their anniversary of 60 years, about 5 years ago or so. And they had a contest of who had the best memories of El Charro. And of course, I won. And you can have this. That kind of tells you a little bit about, you know, where I was coming from then.
When you were growing up, El Charro was in a different location than it is now.
No, same location. Yeah, this little house, El Charro, was right here. There was a creek that ran down here. And El Charro has always been where it is now. And that parking lot behind El Charro, that great big parking lot, if you were to park your car, that house is my big house that they had built when I was 5. Not big and falling apart now, but it was big then. Let's see. So if you, in reference, here's Mount Abla Boulevard. It was a state highway, 2 lanes. And our little, El Charro is here. I mean, would be here. There was a big farm, the Daly Ranch. This, at one time, this was the Daly Ranch. It was just a huge farm. It had horses and chickens and all kinds of animals. But our little cottage was here. We had the big house built here. This was a vacant lot for many, many, many years that they continued to do the walnuts even when we moved here. This was the last plot to be sold, which is now, this would be Starbucks, and this would be, is there 7-Eleven or something like that? And, of course, over here would be the gas station. Grandmother wanted this to be Elizabeth Avenue, but the city wouldn't let her call it that, so they called it Dyer Drive. This was going to be Dyer Drive, and this was going to be Elizabeth, but this whole thing is Dyer Drive. So all the lots were sold, and of course it was a very, very close community back then. Even when they would have baby showers or things, people would gather in the walnut orchards and just put chairs all under the trees and have their little gatherings. Let's see. The next big property next to us was Friendship Farms. I don't know if you ever heard of Friendship Farms, but if you ever go on the highway there, and as a reference, if you go down about to here, you can see it says Friendship Farms. This whole thing was called Friendship Farms. It was a beautiful property, farms. And you'll find people don't even know it's there. It's called the Orchard Gates. And they're big white cement structures, and it says Lafayette Orchards. Nobody notices it. But this was a huge reference point because the Greyhound bus would go on the highway, and all we'd have to do is walk across the highway here and go like this, and the Greyhound bus would stop and pick us up. And of course, Walnut Creek Broadway wasn't there yet. Nothing was here. If we had to do any shopping, we went to Oakland. And so we'd hop on the bus, go into Oakland for the day with our gloves and our hat on, and take the bus. And then coming home, we would tell the Greyhound bus driver, Orchard Gates. And as soon as we'd say Orchard Gates, they would let us off here. And it was considered a privilege of being dropped off at the Orchard Gates, but it was just a really neat way of getting around. Equally, you could get on the Greyhound bus and go to Walnut Creek, and as kids we would do that and go to the park. It was a big deal to go to Civic Park. We had a lot of freedom as kids. We got 25 cents a week allowance, and it was amazing what we could do with that 25 cents.
These handwritten sold signs with the price, is that your grandmother's handwriting, or is that someone else? On some of these forms, there's
let's see.
For instance, here it'll say sold.
Oh, that's my mom.
Oh.
Yeah, that's my mother. Because it was my mom. My mom really was in charge of selling the lots. She was Ruth Wallace, and my father was Clifford Wallace. He was a Lafayette fireman for many years. And firemen, traditionally, they would work for 2 days, 3 days, and have a couple days off. So when he was off, he was a gardener to Henry J. Kaiser, which was the beginning of Kaiser Hospital, which his house was right on Moraga Boulevard. Lovely home before they had the Hawaii house built. And they got to go and visit them in Hawaii. Let's see. See, all these there's so much repetition. But they're all for different purposes, you know. So many papers had to be submitted to various people. Let's see. Okay, we had a very, very close neighborhood. And all of us kids grew up together, and all of our families knew each other. It was golden age. So we all went trick-or-treating together. And the interesting thing about this picture is these are the Ide girls. They were the only Japanese family in Lafayette, and they owned Harry Ide's nursery. They were my friends. They were neat family, loving, kind. We'd go play in the nursery, and we'd even go play up at the cemetery, and and unfortunately their father was interned after Japan, and for some reason I never did know the reason. The kids and the mom wasn't, and he ended up with TB for many years, and I remember him in bed in their house for many years. Very, very nice family. Let's see. My parents, I can't tell you what I went through when they passed. It's quite incredible, but I don't know if they're interested in papers. Now, this is the end of the war, and there's some pretty exciting things. This is the end of the war. My father worked on the bomb. He worked at before he was a fireman. He worked at Lawrence Radiation in Berkeley, and you can see this is San Francisco when the war ended.
These are from the San Francisco Examiner?
This one's from the San Francisco Examiner, and I think one of them is from the Oakland Tribune. This article in the Daily Gazette, Berkeley Daily Gazette, shows where they built the bomb. They built the bomb in Berkeley, right here at the Lawrence lab. These names are every name that had to do with making this bomb. And on the back, my dad's name, Clifford Wallace, is on there. But all of these people...
It's like hundreds of names.
Yes. Yes. I have some medals and some things at home that were things that were given to him as a tribute to that. That was really a horrible thing. Let's see what's going on here. Oh, this is interesting. Well, part of what I've done is my life. I don't know why I'm bringing this. I made the front page of the San Francisco Chronicle. This is me picketing the Girl Scouts. And the reason why we were doing that was I was a Girl Scout leader and organizer of Girl Scout troops for Pleasant Hill. And they wanted to raise the cost of families to pay $20+ a year for these girls to have the privilege of being a Girl Scout. And so we were picketing because the troop that I had, the kids were so poor that they would have to do an exchange for uniforms. They couldn't, this type of thing. So
that's from what year? 1970?
This is 1974. Let's see. When I was in high school, I was a candy striper over at what used to be Concord Community Hospital. I was in the band. I worked in the nurse's office. and I was Girls Athletic Association. I was very, very busy in high school. But one other interesting thing that I did was my aunt was an artist, Catherine Hoover, and she was part of Las Juntas Art Association in Pleasant Hill, which was a very large artist group. And among the group, there was Katie Madsen, who turned out to be a national portrait artist, just famous. And because of my association with my aunt and the closeness, she asked if I wanted to be an artist model. And I was about a junior in high school, and I thought, oh, good, chance to relax, because I was so busy. And I did you'll probably find oodles of paintings of me. Some of them were, you'd wear a bathing suit, and it was just for figure. Some of them were just in different settings, and anyway, 25 years after I was paid real good money too. This would be in 62. I was getting $7 to $10 an hour to do this, but I was an expert at it. I could sit for 15 minutes, take a 5-minute break, sit for 15 minutes, and it was kind of nice. But 25 years later, my aunt connected with this artist who did a painting of me. And she lived up in Canada, and she made arrangements to have the painting that she did of me come back to my family. And the Walnut Festival, which was always a huge thing in Walnut Creek when it was down at the park, at Civic Park, they always had an art show every year. And her painting of me won first place, and it was on the front page of the paper. I don't know where it is. And so when I went to school, all the kids at Okalani's, oh, I saw your picture in the paper and all of these things. So it's hanging on the wall in my house today, and this is the painting. Let's see. Okay. Along the way, another thing that the closeness of our neighborhood, all the ladies got together, or a lot of them, and created this dinosaur for a parade at Lake Temescal. Lake Merritt. They had a children's Halloween parade, and all the ladies got together and made this costume, you might say, of a big dragon. And I am right there. And here's the little article about it.
Do you remember when this was about?
Let's see. It would have been maybe 54. I would guess 54.
And this was it made of fabric or something?
Okay. And they painted. They took fabric. It was an amazing project. I mean, they worked on it for months. They got together every week and worked on it. And then they with paint on fabric. The lady who headed it up, she was a very creative person, Mrs. Angelo.
And there's about 10 children in
yes.
there walking in it? Okay.
My sister is in there and I'm in there. Another interesting aspect in the Times is we had a newspaper. It was a local newspaper. And they had, it was called the Aunt Elsie page. And it was in the Oakland Tribune. And it would run on Sundays. And any child could submit a picture and maybe win a prize, maybe not. And I've always been a gardener all my life, and as a child, even, I don't know where I got the idea, but I asked my mom and dad if I could have a little piece of their yard because I wanted to have a garden. And I was like 9 years old. And so I don't know, no one taught me, no one showed me, no one, said, here's some seeds, go plant it. I don't know. I always had this kind of a thing, building teepees, making bow and arrows, or, just So when I was 10, I wanted to send in a picture to the Aunt Elsie. And I said to Mom, I said, I can't think of what to draw a picture of. And she said, well, Susie, draw a picture of your garden. And so I did, and I sent it in. I didn't win a prize. And this was my garden when I was 10.
Did you have a scarecrow as well?
Yes.
Like
I was one of these kids, you know, even when I was 12, I made paper mache witch for the front porch, you know, and with the crepe paper hair and the nose and the whole thing. And then the next year, I did this picture and I won a prize. I don't remember what it was exactly, but that was another thing I loved to do was fish.
Where did you go fishing?
We would go fishing at White's Pier. I had a neighbor who rented the cottage that was still there when Mom and Dad had moved to the big house. They rented it to the Lorcher family. And Mr. Lorcher would pile a bunch of us kids in the back of his truck and drive us to Martinez. Around there to the water, there would be Port Costa, and White's Pier would be between Martinez and Port Costa. And there was a pier, and for a small sum of money, you could go fishing there, and we would catch flounder. They were delicious, wonderful. So that started my fishing, you know, so I always went up to Cache Creek or different places to fish. I mean, it's nothing better.
And these drawings are from 56 and 57 then?
Mm-hmm.
And so it was a single page in the newspaper, or was it a whole segment?
It was, I think you'd have a comics page, and then it would be like the lower part. It was called Aunt Elsie. I don't know. Aunt Elsie. Elsie was a cow, I think. At a certain point, my sister, you'll probably know about this house. My sister bought one of the oldest houses in Lafayette. And she lived and died in this house. This house is, if you go up Carroll Lane and make a right-hand turn onto Moraga, or what is the name of that street?
Here it says the house is on Moraga Boulevard.
Okay, make a right-hand turn. You go over a bridge. There's a creek. This house sits right there. As a child, I went to a birthday party there. It was the Ginties owned the house, and I believe that the house at one time was a barn on a huge, huge farm, and it was converted. And all the here's all the specs on it. I know the lady who lives in the house today, and she was part of the historical society. And then this is all also about the house, and you could have this.
So the address is 3306 Moraga Boulevard.
I think over the years they proved that this house was the oldest, and there's another one that I think that's on the road that goes from the heart of Lafayette to Ream or out that way.
I think that's Moraga, yeah.
Yeah, windy road.
Do you know when they decided to call the entire lane Dyer Drive? Because on all these maps it's right when they were parceling out the lots, my grandmother was arguing with whoever that she wanted it to be Elizabeth, and they said no. So they actually, there's another street across the highway, that a very little street, and it's called Elizabeth Street because she didn't get it for her property. But so these 1942, is that when she purchased everything, or is
42? That's interesting. 42. That's a good question. Because Mom and Dad lived there from the 30. Let's see. They were married in 36. That's a good question. Does it say what the property is or anything? Does it say land or?
Let's see. This is just an inspection report on Lafayette Gardens, and it's stamped in 1942.
Might have something to do with that date. Sounds like when the parcels were parceled, because Mom and Dad lived there since like in the late 30s. And I was 5. I was born in 45, and I was 5 before the big house was built. So that would have been 1950. So
it could have been. It was owned as just a giant section for.
Oh yeah, it's
long before that, and then
yes,
in 42 they were started.
Yes.
Demarcating. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that would make sense. That would make sense.
What did your grandmother do before she bought all the property?
She was a realtor. Yeah, she was a realtor. She was a very successful realtor and a real go-getter. And that was back in the days where people didn't have a lot of money to, like they. She was a realtor so long ago that people didn't have the money always to pay the realtor the fees. So people would pay her in Persian rugs and, different things. My daughter, in fact, she's curator of rare books at Cornell. And in her lovely home back there, she's got the Persian rugs from my grandmother. And she was a very clever person. She would wheel and deal with people. And she was in real estate for a very, very long time. It's just an interesting. The whole thing is very interesting. Both of my sides of the family came to America in the late 1700s, and it's quite an incredible thing. I have a great-great-great-grandfather that sold gunpowder to George Washington. It's a very long line. My grandmother was matched up with her husband. That's what was done back then for money. Her family had money and matched her up with Otto Schmidt, who was actually adopted by Julius Schmidt, who owned Julius Schmidt Pharmaceuticals, which later became Johnson & Johnson. So, but along the way, there was no inheritance there because legally he was never adopted, and they had 2 of their own children. But the whole history is just incredible going back there. I have so much of the history of the Wisners and the Higbees and the Wallaces, and it's just fabulous. But the history here in Lafayette is incredible. There's no space that you wouldn't be. I mean, we kids were everywhere. This town was ours. If you wanted to roller skate, we would walk to Lafayette Elementary School and roller skate up and down the halls on the weekend. There was a little library down where near Lafayette School was a little library. And the librarians were Mrs. Lloyd and Mrs. Dix. They were fabulous. They would know everybody that would come in there as children. Hi, Susie. Hi, Mary. How are you today? What would you like to read today? And she would take us over to the children's books. Now, we were very young. We were 6, 7 years old, walking to town. My mom didn't drive. My dad was working in Berkeley. we were just everywhere. And so she started me out, I think you'd like this, Susie. And she started me out with the Bobbsey twins. You wouldn't know that book. It's a very, very basic child's book. And then when I read all the Bobbsey twin books, then she said, well, I think that you would like this, And there was always something to do that was so full and so interesting that children today have no opportunity. They're hovered over and taken, they don't have the sense of freedom of being, I knew people from miles around in every house because I was always selling something. Candy for the band, something for the scouts, cookies. I mean, I was always saying, they'd, oh, hi, Susie, what are you selling today? And they would always buy whatever I'd have. It was quite a place to grow up, but it was so wonderful because things were so peaceful and calm. Parents didn't have to worry about harm to their children or anything, and I think the only thing, by the time I got to be about 18, I wanted out of Lafayette. Lafayette became so, the people in Lafayette, they never wanted to grow or expand, or not that that's good necessarily, because Walnut Creek has gotten out of hand. But I bought my first home when I was 21. My grandmother passed, and she left me $37,000, and I bought my first home right over the hill from Lafayette. Where Lenardi's is? Mm-hmm. I bought a house up there on the hill for $22,000, and I still live in this neighborhood in the house next door because it was bigger, and I had a couple kids. And so I've been in that house for 40 some odd years. So I never got very far. I think that it's quite unusual to spend 70 years in such an, close area. But that's it.
I'm just curious, as you were growing up, did you notice things start to develop? Since you said when you were younger, it was almost entirely farms. Mm-hmm. When do you remember things starting to?
Well, when the people bought the lots and built their homes, then it changed because it wasn't so. I did enjoy the horses and there weren't any cows. I know there was a chicken. I don't think it was startling. I just think that it was a gradual. Lafayette didn't change real fast. And that last parcel of land was still there for many, many years. I didn't really feel the change because our boundaries were so far that we didn't just stay in our neighborhood. We were up on the hills. Even, I don't know if you know where that fire just happened in Lafayette, up in the hill. Well, there's a whole hill above Bart there that they had a big fire about a month ago. Even those hills, we were up there catching butterflies with our nets, and our boundaries were so far that it didn't affect us. Mm-hmm. We walked so far all the time. All the schools that I went to, we basically walked, other than when I was in very small elementary school. And then when I went to Spring Hill School, we did have a bus, but that was for 2 years. But to Stanley School, we walked every day. We'd have to start walking at 7 in the morning to get there by 8. When I went to Acalanes, we had to walk to Acalanes. It was just part of what we did. On our bicycles, we were all over the place. I remember as a child walking up and down the highway all the time, and that was the days where everybody smoked, and so people threw their cigarette packages out of their car. Now, this is a little dusty 2-lane road. And we'd make up these games, like we'd step, every time we'd see a cigarette package, we'd step on it, and if we found one that said Lucky Strike on it, that gave us extra bonus points. And I mean, they were all over the road. We would make up these silly games, We were outside all the time. We weren't in the house. Once our chores were done on the weekend, we were out of there. Our parents didn't even know at 12 years old, we'd save up our allowance. Our parents didn't even know that we were up on the highway catching a Greyhound bus, going to Oakland, going to Fairyland. We'd have a great day, come back. Always have to be home by 5. Did you have a nice day, Susie? Oh, yeah, we had a really nice day. They never even knew we were in Oakland or doing these things. And we never got into trouble. We were so fortunate. I might be coming home on the Greyhound bus, and there was one thing that there was maids. There were people in Lafayette that had maids, and they were African American, so they'd be on the buses. And sometimes I'd fall asleep in the bus, and I'd find myself in some man's, asleep in. It was change came very slow to Lafayette. I mean, it's so different now. It's so affluent. It's we didn't have a television until I was, let's see, I might have been 13, and then when in high school, one of my friends got a color TV, and we went over to their house. There's 10 of us waiting to see this peacock spread its. This was like, oh my God, we weren't spoiled. We weren't spoiled. We were lucky if we had 2 pairs of shoes. We were, I wore my sister's hand-me-downs, and our needs were not what they are today. We weren't spoiled, and we lived very frugally. And that was passed on from my generation. I still go to thrift stores. I bought baby clothes at thrift stores. It's just a way of life. It's a way of not wasting things, and if there's a use. It's hard for people to even live anymore. I mean, the fancy cars and the things that they think that they really have to have, that they really don't need to be happy. One of my favorite things to do is to drive to Canyon just to smell the redwood trees. It's hard to imagine that whole hill area going into Oakland, it was all redwood trees. Can you imagine? So beautiful. People are so fortunate to be able to live here because we're near any place you'd want to go, the beach, the redwoods, everything. It's just one of my favorite places is Pacific Grove. It's just beautiful. The air is so much fresher.
So growing up, when you caught the Greyhound, was the tunnel here already, or did you go through the?
Oh yes, the tunnel. Let me see. When was that tunnel put through? Because see, the tunnel had to be there when my mom and dad lived in Oakland. What brought them first out to Lafayette was they had dances, and I almost want to say Moraga. There was a barn where they had dances. It was a bar and a dance place, and that's what brought them out here. The word was out that was a really great place to dance and have a good time. And I think my mom encouraged my grandmother to come out and look back in the 30s. And Grandma liked what she saw because she raised her kids in San Francisco next to the park where it was always foggy and cold. She referred to her girls as always having blue legs. And so that's when she moved to Berkeley. But she was quite taken with, she just wanted her grandchildren to grow up, not in a city. And she was a character. She traveled all over the world. There's no place she didn't go. She just, I wish I had her energy, I tell you. But, and it was fun. We'd walk down, my friend Mary, who lived across the street, her father was also a fireman. And the reason why my dad became a fireman is we had a fire at our house. And somehow it was in my mom and dad's closet. This was a day where you had a closet and you had a chain to pull the light on inside your closet. And they had a down sleeping bag up in their closet, and apparently someone forgot to turn out the light, and the down sleeping bag fell on the light bulb and it started to fire. And when the neighbor saw the smoke coming out of the house and my dad was out in the yard working, he ran in the house, and somehow because of the fire causing a whoosh or whatever it was, he got trapped somehow. And so Mary, my friend across the street, her father, who was a fireman, was home at the time, and he came over and dragged my dad out of the house. So after that happened, my dad decided, I would like to be a fireman. So in those days, all you had to do was go down to the firehouse and say, I want to sign up. Because he had never been to college. Now, they did send him to school, of course. They had training in school. But so Mary and I both had firemen as fathers, so we could walk to town and go visit our fathers at the firehouse. At this time, it was on Moraga Road, of course, And so we'd go down and visit our dad. They'd put us up in the fire trucks and ring the bells and all this stuff. And so we were very much a part of the town. We were just, the town was so us. There was nothing that we hadn't stuck our nose in, Even when the Greyhound, before the Greyhound bus station moved to near where the firehouse was, the Greyhound bus station was right next to the firehouse on Moraga. So my dad would pull these stunts. He'd go in. This was this elderly couple that ran it. Real crabby. Can't remember what their names were. But my dad would run in there and say, hey, what time does the 10 o'clock bus get here? Pranks like that. One time at the firehouse, my father had an electric blanket, and because there was 7 of other guys all sleeping in the room, snoring and all of these things, he had wax earplugs in his ears, and he woke up and there was a flash of flames. Well, his electric blanket had caught on fire. And, and so the guys all got up and got the extinguisher and put out the fire and all that. And the chief was so angry because, he was the only one with an electric blanket, and he endangered the lives of the other guys in there. So the next week, my dad went out and bought another electric blanket, and he went into the chief's office and said, hey, what do you think of my new electric blanket? I mean, he had a sense of humor that was... He liked to pull chains. And growing up, our favorite vacation was every other year we went to Yosemite. And we stayed at Camp 16, which was tent cabins. And I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but it's no longer there. It had its own little store, and it was right along the river there. What's that river called? Merced River? And it was they were just tent cabins with wood floors, and outside it had a wood-burning stove and a table and chairs. and that was it. You know, we could see the firefalls, and we'd go to the dumps to watch the bears, and the bears would come at night, and you'd hear people screaming and different things. So we did that every other year. That was our thing. And then every other year we would go up to Portland, Oregon to see my dad's parents. It wasn't until I was probably a teenager that we started changing things out a little bit, and then Hawaii became my favorite place. But that again has changed since 1958. That's when Honolulu was something else. It was just unimaginable how beautiful and wonderful it was. My kids went to Larky Elementary all their young years because we were 2 blocks from the Lafayette border and 2 blocks from the Walnut Creek School District border. So my kids were in the Mount Diablo School District. So Larky is no longer there. It's now a Christian school, a very high-priced one. So they basically went there for those years, and then Pleasant Hill High School, and then they closed Pleasant Hill High School when my daughter was a sophomore, and she was going to have to go to Ignacio Valley, maybe. And I didn't want them to have to go so far out there, so I did a little thing and got them into Las Lomas. So they went to Las Lomas. I could have probably gotten them into Acalanes, which is one of the most fabulous schools in the whole wide world. It always has been and always will be. No, it is true. People that come here in the 70s, they think, oh, I've been here a long time or something, It's not to live in the same place this long. I mean, it's really incredible. And not to ever move away I retired from the insurance business. I was an insurance agent for 32 years. And I always made sure that my office was just a few miles from home because I wanted to be there for my kids, And it was such a privilege because some people are on the road for hours a day commuting. I don't know how they live or have a life. My mother, she made every day when I came home from school, she either had cookies made or cake or pie. She was the ultimate homemaker. I mean, constantly clean. Dad constantly polishing the wood floors, and we had chores to do. We couldn't. I remember cleaning windows as a young child, and we sometimes we could pick. Do you want to rake the leaves that are this deep? Oak from the oak tree in the backyard, or do you want to do windows, or do you want to clean the bathroom? And I did them all, and you get tired of all of them,
Was there a local grocery store or things like that?
Let's see. The only grocery store that was here was across from the fire department. There was a grocery store there.
So over
on Moraga.
Oh, okay, kind of where the bank and the Lafayette Square.
Yeah, a little bit further down, but it was a market. It was a fairly good size. It wasn't like a mom and pop, And of course, in those days, we didn't have soda. I mean, soda pop. There was no bottles, cans. They did have glass bottles that you could buy at a gas station if you were traveling or something. That was considered a real treat. But we drank Kool-Aid. I mean, that was the thing, Kool-Aid. Any snacks that we'd have carrots or celery or something like that. We didn't have chips or crackers much or anything. Things were very different that way. I think I remember as a child eating horse meat and breast of lamb, because they were very cheap. It was like 10 cents a pound or something like that. I had a friend that lived the hill that I'm talking about that just had the fire. There was a little farm up there on the hill, and Sylvia had a couple horses and rabbits and chickens and all that. So I'd go up to her house and we would ride horses. But the only thing I can remember about animals per se is when there was still the Mars farm behind us. I was very young. I was maybe 5 and 6. And I recall how they would slaughter the chickens is they would tie the feet of the chicken upside down on the clothesline, and then they would cut the head off, and then let the nerves of the chicken would let it go around and around and around on the clothesline and bleed it out. And I remember being disgusted as a child, to that whole thing, and it seemed like there was a barn structure on the property that they didn't know. It was a structure on their land that nobody went to. It was just kind of a structure, and they didn't know it. But me and my friends, we'd sneak behind it and go inside. We had our little clubhouse set up in there. We fixed tables and seats and things. We were always figuring out something to do. I remember the flood. One year, it was maybe March, something like that. It started raining and it just didn't stop. It just went every day, every night, week after week after week. It was the darndest thing, and that's when Broadway and Walnut Creek flooded. And you see pictures in the paper of boats, I mean, Walnut Creek used to have flooding there. They don't anymore, but I remember that. But it was very exciting when Broadway came. It was very different, of course, when it was first built. But it had Penny's and it had Anita's and it was just quite a deal. And then there was Capwell's, and then there was a little eating place in Capwell's. It was just a fabulous thing. And Capwell's had a basement where cheaper things were that we would shop at. But no, it was a big deal. There wasn't too much in Lafayette as far as other than the pharmacy that was where Starbucks is now on that corner.
By the Roundup Bar?
Right. Yeah, the Roundup Bar was... Let me tell you, my mother would get so distraught with my dad. He always said the best times he ever had in his whole life was in the Roundup. My mom would get all riled up. But, back then, for being such a small town, they had 5 bars downtown. They had 2 on that side, they had 3 on this side, and they did a big business too. People loved the bars. But then on that corner there near Roundup, that was where the pharmacy was. In the pharmacy was a fountain where you sat on stools like, you picture. And then you could order a cherry Coke or lemon Coke or whatever. And all the boys would sit against the front looking at comic books. They didn't say you couldn't look at the magazine. All the boys would be there doing that. And then it was also a pharmacy, and they knew all of us kids, and then there was a dime store, a 5 and dime store. And that's where we would buy our penny candies. I mean, boy, that was bad. I mean, we were bad on that. But otherwise, there just really wasn't much. There was maybe one gas station, the Shell gas station. Mel Nielsen owned it, and he was also the mayor of Lafayette. Just not much here. It's amazing they even had a library, as small a town as it was. But so that's about it. I can't think of anything else.
Interview ends at 12:30 p.m., and the interviewer was Ryan McKinley.